there is one thing you can do in your GoPro to instantly get better time lapses. Whether you're filming a time-lapse video mode or photo mode, using this one feature will dramatically improve your time-lapse quality. As long as you use this feature correctly, of course. This one feature you'll want to use is known as exposure control. Exposure control is a new and improved version of spot meter. Spot meter is a feature that was available on older GoPros, so if you own one of the older GoPros, you might recognize the name of this feature. And you may have even used it before, but a lot of people don't know you can use the exposure control feature in time-lapse mode as well. It's not just for video mode. So by default, when you're using your GoPro in video mode or time-lapse mode, the GoPro uses the entire frame to calculate the exposure. But with exposure control, you get to select a small section of your frame, and you get to tell your GoPro to use that small section to calculate the exposure. Exposure control is particularly useful when you have uneven lighting across your frame, or if you have lighting that's constantly changing. And this, of course, is very useful in many time-lapse scenarios. Using exposure control ensures your time-lapse lighting changes less from frame to frame than if you just use the default entire frame exposure control. This ultimately ends up keeping the motion looking smoother and better, and there's less of that flickering or dramatic changes in lighting. And this is particularly important during a time-lapse when you're speeding up time, because any of those drastic changes in lighting become a lot more noticeable, and it'll look really bad in a time-lapse. So I'm going to show you how to use the exposure control feature, and I'm going to provide some practical tips for how to use it well to get the best results. And one other thing worth mentioning about the exposure control is you can use this not only in time-lapse mode with video or photos, but you can also use it in the photo mode. So if you create time lapses with interval photos, you can also use the exposure control there, and it's going to help you get great results there as well. And you can use this with or without ND filters. You don't have to have ND filters for this to work. ND filters will help you get a slower shutter speed on a bright day like today, but you don't have to have ND filters. And the best part about this feature is there's no extra cost. It's available by default on your GoPro. So first of all, let's talk about how to use the exposure control feature. So right now I am in time-lapse mode, got it set there. And in order to use it, all you have to do is click and hold anywhere on the screen. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna get this box that pops up. So if you're doing a daytime time-lapse like this, where the sun is in and out of clouds, what I recommend first of all, is I recommend having your GoPro facing away from the sun. So right now the sun is behind us here, and I am facing where the sun is at my back. And you can drag this box around, and you'll notice if I drag it up to the sky, it's gonna make my foreground a lot darker. It's going to make my sky properly exposed. But if I drag this down to my foreground, it's going to properly expose my foreground, but it's going to make the sky very bright and overexposed. But if you do have a creative scenario where you want to have the foreground brighter and the sky overexposed, or if you want to have the sky properly exposed and the foreground darker, you can drag that around. So you've got a lot of flexibility there. So for this time lapse, I'm actually going to put it right there. I like that. I want the foreground a little bit darker, but then I want my sky to be properly exposed there. Once you've selected where you want to hit the check mark, and then it's going to confirm exposure select set. And then that bracket is going to stay there until you power off your camera or until you cancel to remove it. But once you've set it, all you need to do is hit the capture button like that, and it's going to start capturing your time lapse. And once you decide you want to remove the bracket, you can either power off your GoPro or you can just tap in the center of it and it's going to clear it. So that's really easy, right? So for a daytime time lapse, I recommend experimenting, feeling out what you like best. Now, when it comes to a sunset time lapse, I'm going to turn my camera here and I'm going to face it toward the sun so you can get a feel for what we need to do for those. So we're gonna move over here, and right now the sun is up here above. So now that we're in the lighting, we need to make some adjustments here on my other camera so you can actually see what I'm doing. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna angle the GoPro up slightly so it includes the sun. So I've got the GoPro pointing up toward the sky and the sun is right about there. So if you were filming a sunset, one thing I recommend not doing is make sure you do not select the sun for the part of your frame you want to expose. Because if you do, it will properly expose for the sun, but it's going to make the rest of your frame extra dark. I've got it exposed properly for the sun, but basically the rest of the frame, you can't really see anything. It's entirely dark. So what I recommend at sunset is when you're exposing it, first of all, set up your frame so the sun is going to stay close to one of the sides because the sun is not the highlight of the sunset anyway. It's going to be the way the sun is illuminating the clouds. That's going to be what you really want to capture. So let's move this out a little bit so we get more of the sky in the frame. All right, so now that we have that, the way I would frame the exposure, I would set this over here to the side and I would have it right about there to expose my frames. So after I select that, I would hit the checkbox and it's going to adjust. And that's how I would expose this scene if I was filming a sunset in it. And then I would start the time-lapse capturing. And one of my other things that I love doing at sunset, sometimes I love having the GoPro pointed to the opposite part of the sky. It can make for some really great looking time lapses and you don't have to worry about any of the weird exposure. The sky opposite the sun is going to maintain a pretty consistent exposure. And if you'd like to learn more about my best settings for GoPro time lapses, check out this video right here.